Frost Death Knights utilize the icy touch of death to bring down their enemies. So today I'm going to show you everything you need to know to succeed. It's going to be very beginner friendly, whether you're new to the class, the spec, or even just WoW. And it's also going to be very veteran friendly. So I am going to be going into a high level of detail, but making it basically, okay for beginners. So I want to start off today with the stat priority. And as a Frost Death Knight, of course, we want strength as our primary stat. The way to get that is, of course, getting a higher and higher eye level or item level of gear. Now, I will put the stat priority here for you for secondary stats, which is a general guide of which are better for us Frost Death Knights in the War Within. However, it isn't guaranteed. If you know how, I would advise that you simulate your character. I can help you out on Patreon if you'd like. If you're a beginner, I wouldn't really worry too much about it at all. I would just get a higher and higher eye level to get more strength. The secondary stats aren't going to make that much of a difference when you're getting higher and higher eye level. Then, of course, looking at the secondary stats, first is we have crit. Generally, this just means that we're going to be doing, more damage. We then have our mastery, which is called Frozen Heart. This is going to increase the damage of our frost abilities. Really, really easy there. Haste is actually going to increase how quickly we attack. And it's also going to increase how quickly our runes, which are, as you can see here under my character, a resource that us Death Knights have. It's going to actually affect how quickly they regenerate once we use them. And lastly, versatility is going to increase any damage and also healing done while simultaneously reducing the damage we take. And that is pretty much it for the stats. Again, just get a higher and higher eye level so that we get more strength, and that you're going to be absolutely fine. Looking at the set bonus, if you don't know these spells or don't understand this, don't worry, I'll be covering it fully in the rotation. So the 2 set, your runic power spending abilities deal more damage, and the 4 set, consuming runic power, has a chance to increase your strength. 2 very passive things that are going to be happening there with our set bonus in Season 1. So next up, we're going to look through the utilities and some of the defensives, etc., that we have available to us as a Death Knight in the War Within. Now, I'm not going to show you every single one that you have in your spellbook or that you can get in the Death Knight talent tree. There are quite a lot. However, if you're a beginner or not a beginner, these are the important ones that I think you should know about. And the other ones that I'm not talking about, do have a look through your spellbook in your spare time, but they're going to be a lot more kind of niche ones. So starting off, we've got up here Path of Frost. This basically for 10 minutes means that you can walk on water. It will freeze the water beneath your feet and you can walk on water. Now, in raids, it generally probably isn't really used much. It can be sometimes. In Mythic Plus, there's certain situations where this can actually be really, really useful. And, in certain PvP battlegrounds and things like that. So it is actually a really good ability to know about. Then we have, where's the target dummies? Then we have here Chains of Ice. And you can see here I've put Chains of Ice around them. Literally, this is going to shackle your enemy and one nearby target. Okay, so it's not like an area of effect. It's only one nearby target. And this is going to cost you 1 rune here. With Frozen Chains, it's going to reduce the movement speed by 70% for 8 seconds. So massive slow. Then we have Mind Freeze. On a 15-second cooldown, this is quite simply your interrupt, otherwise known as a kick. This is going to interrupt your enemy's spellcasting. Then we have Death Pact. Create a Death Pact that heals you for 50% of your maximum health, but absorbs incoming health or healing equal to 30% of your max health for 15 seconds. So it's going to actually give you a massive amount of healing, but then it's going to actually absorb some incoming healing. But overall, you are going to heal more. So this is a defensive cooldown we can use. We then have here Raise Ally. So although Death Knights can't usually just resurrect people, they can actually have a battle res. What does this mean? Well, it means you can resurrect somebody in combat, and this is how you do it. It is on a long cooldown, however. We then have Icebound Fortitude. Your blood freezes, granting immunity to all stun effects and reduces all damage taken by 30%. Anti-Magic Zone. This is a really cool one, as you can see here. Places an anti-magic zone that reduces spell damage taken by your party and raid members by 20%. and it will last for 8 seconds or until it has absorbed a certain amount of damage. And then lastly, we have Lichborn, draw upon unholy enemy energy to become undead for 12 seconds. You can see you've got the little icon above your head when this is happening. It's going to increase your leech by 6%, reduce damage taken, and making you immune to charm and fear effects. So leech, will actually appear up here on your stats, and this is obviously where you leech back health from your enemy when you deal damage to them. And this is actually going to be like a tertiary stat, whereas, strength is your primary stat. These are your secondary stats, and I would sort of say leech, avoidance, and speed, which you can sometimes get on gear if you're lucky, or you can get them things from like Lichborn. These are your tertiary stats. And these really are the only main utilities that I think you need to know about as a Death Knight in, Season 1, 11.0 of The War Within. Like I said, do go through your spellbook, etc. There's things like Death Grip, and there's Control Undead and other things like that could be useful in more niche situations. But these ones I've shown you, like I said, are the core ones or the important ones that I think you should know about. Now for the exciting bit, the actual rotation we'll be using on our Frost Death Knight in The War Within. Just as a heads up, we are going with Deathbringer for both the Raid and Mythic Plus specs. And we're going to be starting off with the Raid rotation and then looking at what we're changing it with, etc. for the Mythic Plus rotation. So when we are using our abilities, the first thing you'll notice is we're going to generate runic power. We generate it passively, sometimes we generate it in other ways, and then we have these runes that we can also use on our abilities as well. So it's quite a simple rotation for Frost Death Knights at the moment. The first thing we're going to be using, which will cost 30 runic power, this is our top priority, is Frost Strike. Chill your weapon with icy power and strike the enemy, dealing frost damage. Now what you'll notice when we use this is we get Unleashed Fury, where our strength is increased, and also Icy Talons. Unleashed Frenzy is here. Damaging an enemy with a runic power ability increases your strength by 2% for 10 seconds. That can also stack up to 3 times. The main reason we're using Frost Strike as our number one priority is to keep up that buff on ourselves at all times. The second one we're going to get here is Icy Talons. Attack speed is increased by 6%, and runic power spending abilities deal Shadow Frost damage. So again, we want to keep both of those up. Then we have Empower Rune Weapon on a 2-minute cooldown. You're going to want to use this on cooldown. Empowers your rune weapon, gaining haste and generating 1 rune and runic power instantly and every 5 seconds for 20 seconds, just helping you get through the rotation faster. Then we have Obliterate, a brutal attack dealing physical damage. You'll also notice sometimes we'll get a proc on it. We have this here called Killing Machine. Your auto-attack critical strikes have a chance to make your next Obliterate, deal frost damage, and critically strike. And there it is, right on cue, Killing Machine. You can see that has procced there on my Obliterate. That has now procced something called Rhyme on our Howling Blast, but more on that in a minute. First of all, we've got Soul Reaper before we get there. If we have 3+ runes, and the target is below 35% health, we're going to use Soul Reaper. If that is not applicable, we're going to move on. Soul Reaper then, on a 6-second cooldown, strike an enemy for Shadow Frost damage and inflict the enemy with Soul Reaper. After 5 seconds, if the target is below 35% health, this effect will explode, dealing an additional amount of damage to the target. Then we're going to use Howling Blast, specifically to apply this here, Frost Fever. This is going to be a dot or damage over time on the target, and it is applied with Howling Blast. Blast the target with Frigid Wind, dealing frost damage to that foe, and reduce damage to all other nearby enemies, inflicting all of them with Frost Fever. That's a disease that deals frost damage over time, and has a chance to grant your Death Knight 5 runic power every time it does damage. And here is our Rhyme that I spoke about before. Obliterate, so the ability we spoke about before that, which again is this one here that's propped, has a 45% chance to cause your next Howling Blast to consume no runes at all and deal 300% damage. It doesn't really change where we're using Howling Blast in the rotation. Technically, actually, it's really only being used here to apply Frost Fever, and then we're using it here if we have Rhyme. In the middle of that is using Frost Strike again if we've only got less than 2 runes available. Then we're using Howling Blast if we have Rhyme, and lastly, if you've got nothing else to press, then it is going to be Frost Strike. Now, you'll notice here I've got some cooldowns as well. When the hell do we use these? We have here Pillar of Frost. The power of Frost increases your strength by 30% for 12 seconds. You can use that on cooldown. We then have our Raise Dead. Raises a ghoul to fight for your side. You can only have a maximum of one ghoul at a time. It does last a minute, but it's on a 1.5 minute cooldown. I would use this pretty much on cooldown as well. But specifically, try and use it with Pillar of Frost at the same time. We then have Reaper's Mark. Viciously slice into the soul of your enemy, dealing Shadow Frost damage and applying Reaper's Mark. Each time you deal Shadow or Frost damage, you add a stack of Reaper's Mark, and after 12 seconds or reaching 40 stacks, the mark explodes, dealing damage. Reaper's Mark travels to an unmarked enemy nearby if the target dies or explodes below 35% health. And you'll want to use that just before you use your Pillar of Frost to maximize all of that out. And then you can use Abomination Limb on cooldown as well, sprout an additional limb, dealing shadow damage over 12 seconds to nearby enemies, and it deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. And those are your cooldowns. And that pretty much is the main rotation for the single target and raid rotation. If we then move over into the Mythic Plus rotation, you can see barely anything is changing at all. Mainly, we're getting Frostworm's Fury. We're going to be using our Frost Strike again as before, using it in Power Rune Weapon as before, but also using our Death and Decay and making sure that we're in it with our enemies. Corrupts the targeted ground, causing shadow damage over 10 seconds to art targets in the area. While you remain within the area, your Obliterate will also hit additional targets. Hence why we must make sure we're trying to stay in our Death and Decay, keeping it up as much as possible so that our Obliterate will also do multi-target cleave damage. Use Rime, same as before. Frost Strike, Howling Blast, and then Rime and Frost Strike exactly as before. Same on the cooldowns as well. Some of these are going to do AoE. We've got Remorseless Winter. Drain the warmth from life forms all nearby enemies within 8 yards, dealing frost damage over 8 seconds and reducing their movement speed. And that will do that in the area. Don't forget Abomination Limb will do pretty much AoE damage. And we've also got Frostwind's Fury, summoning a Frostworm who breathes on all enemies within 40 yards in front of you, dealing frost damage and slowing their movement speed as well. And you can pretty much use these all on cooldown. Those are the only real changes we are making to Frost Death Knight in an AoE environment or Mythic Plus scenario. So for this build, we are going with Deathbringer as a Frost Death Knight. The first thing it gives you, obviously, is Reaper's Mark. It is on a 45-second cooldown. To go through what it does again, viciously slice into the soul of your enemy, dealing Shadow Frost damage and applying Reaper's Mark. Each time you deal Shadow or Frost damage, they get stacks of that. Once it reaches 40 stacks, it explodes. Reaper's Mark then travels to another target if the target dies. Okay, we've got Wave of Souls here. Reaper's Mark sends force bursts of that Shadow Frost damage energy there and back, doing damage to anything in its path on both routes. Wave of Souls Critical Strike actually causes the enemy to take more Shadow Frost damage from you as well for 15 seconds, and this can stack twice. On its way back, it is always going to be a crit as well. Soul Rupture. When Reaper's Mark explodes, it deals some of the damage dealt to nearby enemies, and enemies hit by this effect deal reduced damage to you. Then I'm going for Painful Death. Reaper's Mark deals more damage, and Exterminate now empowers an additional Obliterate, but reduces its rune cost by 1 as well. And Exterminate also now has a chance to actually apply Reaper's Mark as well. Blood Fever. Your Frost Fever has a chance to deal more damage as Shadow Frost. Reaper's Mark Explosion deals more damage based on the target's missing health, and automatically applies Soul Reaper to targets below 35% health, meaning it now does it passively without you having to press a button yourself. Wither Away. Frost Fever deals its damage in half the time, and the second Scythe of Exterminate applies Frost Fever as well, helping keep up your debuffs. Bind in Darkness. Shadow Frost damage applies 2 stacks to a Reaper's Mark, and 4 stacks when it's a critical strike. And Rime, Empowered Howling Blast, deals Shadow Frost damage as well. A lot of this is quite passive, as you can see. This isn't changing the rotation we've already shown. Really, we're just looking at Reaper's Mark, what we're adding in the hero talents, and why, because the hero talents are new, of course. Death's Messenger, reducing the cooldown on Lichborn and Raise Dead. And then Exterminate, of course. After Reaper's Mark explodes, your next 2 Obliterates cost 1 room and summon 2 Scythes to strike your enemies. They each do different things. The first Scythe strikes your target for Shadow Frost damage and has a chance to apply Reaper's Mark. The second strikes all enemies near your target and applies Frost Fever. So it's a really good way of getting your Frost Fever out to all enemies in an AoE or multi-target situation. And that pretty much is Deathbringer for Frost Death Knights. For the consumables and enchants, etc., a few things have changed. Main thing, if you're in Frost DK, go with Rune of Razor Ice on your main hand, and offhand is Rune of the Fallen Crusader. For Unholy Death Knights, if you are going to be in that spec too, it's just going to be Rune of the Fallen Crusader on your two-hand. If you're new to Death Knight and you're like, what are these? This is your Death Knight rune forging that you can do back at Archerous Hold, for your portal. And Death Knights do have their own weapon enchants, which are these. So we can now add Nerubian Gem Weavers. These are how you add sockets to your gear from the weekly vault. So we have head, wrist, and waist where we can add these on. Chant of Winged Grace on your cloak is going to be avoidance and some fall damage reduction. The chest is Crystalline Radiance, increasing your primary stat. Armored Avoidance is obviously avoidance on the wrist. Legs is Stormbound Armor Kit. This adds strength. Scout's March adds movement speed. I think it's 250 movement speed you get on the boots. Critical Strike on the rings, but again, you can use different ones depending on what secondary stat is best if you are simming your character. And then again, the weapons we mentioned. The Magnificent Jeweler settings, you can use 2 now on your neck and each ring, rather than in the previous X-Pack where you could only have 3 sockets added to your neck. Now it is 2 per jewelry slot. For the actual consumables, the Flask of Alchemical Chaos is the best for maximum DPS. Go for the Tempered Versatility one if you just want a kind of all-rounder. But for maximum DPS, it is going to be this one. It's going to massively increase one secondary stat while slightly reducing the other 2. Now, this will rotate, and a Tempered Potion, when you use your potion, will increase your lower secondary stats as well. We can go in for Feast of the Divine Day or Salt Bake Seafood for your food. Algari Healing Potion is the War Within's healing potions. Mana Oil is the weapon oil that you can now have. And if you are using an Augment Rune, it's going to be this Crystallized Augment Rune, which is the same for everyone. It adds primary stats. Then we have the Blasphemite. This is interesting. This basically means it's going to add some primary stat, but you need to use different colored gems in your other slots to get the maximum critical effect from this epic gem. So you can use a ruby, an onyx, an emerald, and a sapphire to get the full effect. Basically, it will add 0.15% critical effect per different color gem you have. So if you're only using one color gem, you're going to get 0.15 effect. If you're using 4 different colors, you'll get the full 0.60. And these are the colors I would say to use. Then if you have other gem slots after those first 5, then just use whatever you think is best depending on stat priorities, etc., etc. Thank you so much for watching this guide. I hope it was really useful for you in the War Within Season 1, whether it was for Mythic Plus or raiding. If you do have any questions, I'll be happy to help. My Patreon is in the description below, and that is where you can find my LVUI profiles, which I'll show you in a second. And also, I'm putting together a huge macro list for every single spec that's going to be really useful for you in the War Within as well. I am doing all classes and specs for the War Within, so if you are new to the channel, then please do click this playlist here to check out what else I have, which is all of them. There will also be PvP guides on this channel as well for War Within Season 1, so make sure to look out for that. This here is the UI that I was referring to. As you can see, we've got target frames, etc., left and right, and raid frames go in the middle here, and then weak auras in the middle with an action bar down here. Chat is behind where my camera is. Minimap and details, etc., are here on the right. All of the Plater profiles, the Voodoo, the LVUI, etc., details profile has all been made by me. And again, you can get this on my Patreon should you like it.